First off, this isn't a video complaining about TFD or claiming that it's dead. I'm saying that it could die like Anthem or like Outriders if it doesn't learn the secret sauce that games like Destiny and Warframe spent years trying to master. These games have years of trial and error and development, bad times, good times, and everything in between. TFD has a huge advantage that they can learn and incorporate these critical endgame systems right now. So what is this secret sauce that's created years of replayability and success? In this video, I'm going to tell you what it is, and how Destiny 2 and Warframe keeps people coming back to play season after season, year after year. We're going to talk about variety, aspirational content, and the simple changes that have been proven to boost player retention and engagement. So let's get into it. So what actually is endgame? I want to start off by sort of defining the term because it is an important metric in player engagement, and it's something that we can compare between multiple games across the genre. I want to define it as aspirational or pinnacle content as it's often described. It's things that people want to do and they want to get better at, be that through faster clears, maybe a first time clear, or surviving longer in Warframe's example. How does First Descendant get people to endgame? It does it a little bit differently to some other games where it's a gradual progression. You know what you're getting into very early on with the Colossus fights, but then there's not really much else outside of that besides general daily farming and daily tasks. At the moment, endgame would be considered Gluttony and then maybe the invasion dungeons. That's kind of it at the moment, and Gluttony isn't good endgame at the moment because there's nothing you want to go back for. You do it once to clear the quest and then you're kind of done because Peacemaker is not a good gun and the amorphous materials aren't special and they aren't unique. And so Gluttony not being a very fun fight means that the rewards have to really be super good for you to want to keep going back, and they just aren't. There's better ways to get the things that drop from Gluttony. The other probably only example of endgame content right now are the invasion dungeons, and these are time locked to 4 a day, and they're also relatively easy. If you're someone who cleared them on day one, you got golds, you're never going to have an issue with any of them. They're all very, very simple to clear once you have a good build and good weapons and a good understanding of the mechanics. And there's no challenge. And while the rewards are good, there's no, maybe I should bring a different gun or maybe I should bring a different Descendant. It's bring an Ultimate Bunny, bring a Lepic, bring someone who's good at the content and you'll be fine. And it's very, very easy to be good at. Let's quickly talk about the lessons that Nexon and the First Descendant can actually learn from some of the other games. An example that I thought of was Destiny 2's Year 1, and that was a dark period for Destiny. If you played during that time, you'd know. Content wasn't engaging or entertaining, and everyone was kind of stuck in a daily loop of basic tasks like bounty grinding, and it all kind of relied on this FOMO. The main issue was that pinnacle content wasn't even in the game. Leviathan, the raid, wasn't fun. The raid layers weren't fun and the rewards weren't that great. And there was no reason to farm anything because there were static rolls and static drops and nothing was different. I also want to compare this to Warframe's early days, back when people were doing void survival for farming primes. Before the modern relic system, players were incentivized to make their builds stronger and more specialized for void survival and some of the other mission types, because the longer you were in there for, the better the rewards. It was an endless grinding mode that you just kept wanting to get better at. Let's also talk about Borderlands, specifically Borderlands 2 and 3. These aren't MMORPG looter shooters like Destiny and Warframe and the First Descendant, but they are looter shooters and they do nail very consistently what is engaging about the genre. And I want to compare the current situation in the First Descendant to playing Borderlands 2 and 3 without any DLC. There's very, very little content. The only sort of things to do are arbitrary loot grinds in the same few activities. You know, there's 1 or 2 bosses that you can beat, and then everything else is sort of, you have to create your own goals and there's no real direction. I also want to talk about Anthem and Outriders, both games that are by all means dead. Anthem is offline, you can't even play it anymore. But what actually killed both of these games? It was the lack of engaging and aspirational content, and the games just didn't have the systems in place to improve. And Outriders Endgame is basically TFD's dungeon system with modifiers and slightly better loot for doing it on harder modifiers and harder difficulties. But fundamentally, they didn't have the capabilities to switch quickly and change direction and rebalance the game. Now, how did these more successful games in the genre change and solve their issues? It was through variety. Destiny 2 reintroduced random weapon rolls and harder content that was way more rewarding with the launch of Forsaken. Destiny always had these systems in place and they could improve on them when they wanted to change the game. For Warframe, Riven mods were the big thing, the big additional variety that people are looking for. Because every weapon has a static roll, every gun has the same base stats, every build ends up being sort of the same. Except for Riven mods, which are entirely unique mods for specific weapons that add stats, take some stats away, but they are, at their core, variety. They can entirely change the way someone uses a weapon, and they're entirely unique to that specific mod. Warframe also introduced more incentives to endless missions besides Void Survival. They added Kuiper Survival and Steel Path, which are added difficulty that challenge even the best of builds to this day. Because Warframe has these fundamental systems now, every update and every balance patch changes the strategy for these missions, changes the best way to get these done, to survive longer, and even if it isn't ultimately shifting the meta, it's still adding variety to people who maybe play a different frame or use different weapons. Warframe created the systems to have evergreen content. There wasn't only one thing to do because of infinite scaling. Slight changes in the meta can make drastic changes to the difficulty of any activity. It's not just what has been determined as the hardest thing by arbitrary health pools and damage, like with Gluttony. And finally, the Borderlands DLC adds more of the same of what makes the game good. It adds new weapons and new variety to build crafting through maybe extra levels, and it also adds new farming locations and new raid bosses. Now, what can the First Descendant do quickly? In a recent lecture, TFT's producer Lee Bumjun outlined that the game's numbers were going down since the launch of Season 1. And he also teased that the team were re-exploring this idea of infinite scaling and infinite length missions and horde objectives, not unlike what we see in Warframe with survival and defense missions. Now, this is a step in the right direction. Infinite scaling and horde objectives provide a testing ground for builds, and it is a form of aspirational content for people who want to test the upper limits of Descendants and weapons. But I think overall the biggest thing that TFT needs to learn is variety. It doesn't need to be content variety. I'm not going to sit here and complain like, ooh, we need more content. We already have some good and replayable content like the dungeons and mission types like barrier deactivation. I'm talking about build and weapon variety. The stark difference between TFT and Warframe is that build crafting is generally really boring. There is a definitive best build for everything, and everyone can have it and use it for very little effort. We need more weird and wild things. 90% of the weapons in this game are useless and boring. We need more variety to farm for. At the moment, you could create a checklist of everything that you need in TFT, where to farm it, and you could be done in a few days. There's literally no incentive to try anything outside of the few meta weapons there are. People talk about wanting 24-player dungeons and real raids and harder content, when what the game needs is variety. That sort of content gets boring really quickly once the meta and optimal strategies are figured out. So we need to expand the meta through balance changes and number shifts. The game doesn't need more content at the moment. It needs the current content to be adjusted to allow for more build diversity and creativity. Like with Warframe, you could pick up pretty much any gun in the game and any Warframe, and there would be some super unique way to mod it out that would put it on par with some of the best options in the game. And we just don't have that in TFT at the moment. Literally 90% of the weapons do nothing or next to nothing. Things like the Final Masterpiece and the Executor Shotgun literally feel like they do nothing. There's so many weapons that with small changes to the way they function or the numbers that they provide could actually make them genuinely really cool, and you could create Descendant builds based around these weapons. We saw a few weeks ago when Greg's Reverse Fate was changed from activating on the first hit of an enemy with a shield to just a random chance to proc, how that shifted the meta, and we got weapon platform builds for Gley and Blair If we saw that with every gun in the game that's currently pretty useless, the actual amount of build diversity and things people would be confident taking into boss fights or farming missions would skyrocket. Certain weapons on paper sound really cool, but then you actually go and look at the stats. Like the Final Masterpiece, I think, is a great example of this, where it sounds really cool. On reloading, you get a random buff, and getting all 3 of the buffs gives you an even bigger bonus. But then you actually look at what the buffs do, and they're pretty useless. The excitement dies very, very quickly. And for what reason? It just makes me not want to play for that weapon anymore. It makes me not want to try it out. I don't want to use it. We were working on a series where we were going to go through and test out some of these weapons and max them out and put tons of effort into building them out. And we got about halfway through a few of the weapons and realized that there were literally no redeeming qualities. Like the Wave of Light Scout Rifle is genuinely useless. And the King's Guard Lance, while it's sounds fun, you know, it's a gun that shoots a turret, like that's really cool. That thing does nothing. It is genuinely awful. And the same can also kind of be said for a lot of the Descendants. There is no point to playing any character other than Bunny, or any character other than Gley or Lepic. I think those 3, if you have those 3, you don't need to play any other character. You will ultimately be disappointed by other characters when you start playing someone like Bunny. I put in tons of effort grinding out Freyna, and I have maxed catalysts, and I have an energy activator, and I've tried countless builds, and just none of them farm as well as Bunny. Not even remotely. My ultimate Bunny, which doesn't even have an energy activator in it, is better for farming than my max AoE Freyna build. There is no incentive to play characters like Kyle, Ajax, Blair, Viessa. There's just no reason to play them because every other character does everything better than them. And this isn't me calling for nerfs to Bunny or Lepic or Gley. I'm just saying that our worst Descendants need to be changed in a way that makes their gameplay more fun and more engaging. Bunny is fun because she's easy to use and she's intuitive. SCMO is one of the clunkiest characters I've ever played in a video game. On paper, he doesn't seem like it, but when you actually put it into practice and you test it, I don't want to have to go through a 1.5 second animation every time I want to do damage. You could realistically pick up an Enduring Legacy, a Piercing Light or Afterglow Sword, and a Thunder Cage, and then maybe Bunny or Gley, and then you're literally set for the game. You don't need to do anything else because that is the hard meta and nothing else will ever beat that at the moment, which is why we need weird and wild and different mods and changes to these weapons that maybe they're not as strong as something like the Thunder Cage, but they offer something else. It's not just, well, this gun shoots and enemies explode, and so it's better than everything else. Why not make like the Final Masterpiece give you a movement speed boost? Because then there's actually an incentive to use it. The game hasn't been out for long. We shouldn't have these redundancy issues already. There are Descendants and weapons that seem antithetical to the way the game is meant to be played. I know a lot of people who have gone through all the weapons and they've looked and they've analyzed the stats and they've just asked why. Why does this function so weirdly and so badly? Why are they afraid to give this gun more than 1 extra bullet in the mag when it reloads? Everything has a hard cap or a limit that prevents creativity for the sake of quote-unquote balance. But there is no balance. There is a strict meta. There are things that you should use and things that you shouldn't use because they are a waste of time. You can go pick up Destiny right now and you could use pretty much any exotic weapon in that game and it would feel unique and it would feel fun. It may not be great, but it's something special and something that you want to try and build around and that you want to use more to figure out. I could go through and list every Destiny exotic that fills people with a sense of creativity and sort of wonder. And I could probably count on one hand the weapons in the First Descendant that make people excited to grind and play the game for. It's impossible for me to compare the First Descendant to modern day Destiny or modern day Warframe because, again, the First Descendant hasn't been out that long. But there are serious examples and lessons that need to be learned from years of these games' development. People compare the First Descendant to Warframe because the modding system and a lot of the actual systems are very, very similar. But then the First Descendant didn't learn from the mistakes and the pitfalls of the genre. But it can. It has some of the systems in place, and the developers are talking about how they can make the game better based on modern standards. It's unfair for people to compare the First Descendant to Warframe and Destiny in terms of content, because those games have existed for a decade. But people don't want to have to go through a whole decade of highs and lows like we did with those games. We don't want to go through that again. These games exist as a testament to their design philosophy, that variety and fun matters over balance in a lot of cases. And that is a lesson learned over 10 years, over longer in Warframe's case. In the modern era, that's why you can see games like Outriders and Anthem fail, because they are so focused on making their game to their vision and not letting players be creative. There's a very solid foundation here for a fun game that could exist for a very long time, but at the moment, it's incredibly predictable. I think I can probably speak for the community when I say that I want more creativity and license. I want more randomness in builds. There are so many weapons and Descendant abilities and Descendant augment mods that could be really strong, but the poor numbers, in the sake of balance, get in the way. I don't know why abilities have range caps. Why not let me spec entirely into range at the cost of skill efficiency, skill cooldown, and skill strength? Let me cover the entire battlefield in a Blair one, if I so choose. There are so many arbitrary caps and limits on things that it feels safe. Let us go all in on things and explore different options as opposed to all-round jack-of-all-trades builds, because that's what we're forced into. At the end of the day, the game is fun, and I applaud the devs for being so transparent with the community, and I applaud them for working on the things that the community wants, but they need to learn that at the end of the day, player retention is the most important aspect of live service games. And I think Nexon probably knows that pretty well, managing multiple live service games. And the key in looter shooter games like Warframe, Destiny, Borderlands to an extent, The Division, Outriders, Anthem, I mean, the list goes on. The biggest thing that separates those that swim and those that sink is variety. With all that said, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. Let us know down in the comments what your thoughts are on the future of the First Descendant. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.